Welcome back to the beginning of Lesson 4. As I pointed out, we're going to begin to take a look now at how the scale, the pentatonic scale, relates to the chord, and to specifically the triad notes that went to make up the chord. Now, we're going to listen to me playing the scale over a C major chord. Let's listen. Now, here's my bar chord at the 8th fret in the key of C. And here's my scale at the back of it going this way, which of course you can play quite efficiently by now. And now let's take a look at the notes that make up the C chord and where they are in the scale. We have a C here, and we have an A here on this note, but A isn't in the chord, but C is. So this is called, or referred to, as a chord note. Again, it's one of the 3 triad notes that made up the C chord. We have a C here, we have a D there, which we don't need for now, we have an E here, we have a G there, an A here, a C there, a D here, an E here, a G here, an A here, and a C here. Now, I wanted to spell them out to you because you're probably not familiar with the notes on the other strings besides the 6th and the 5th. But the significance of what I'm showing you is this. If a C chord is playing, you will find that when you play certain notes in the scale, specifically the chord notes or the notes that are in that triad, the C, the E, or the G, then when you play those notes, you can often stay there for a long time. So the significance of that is when you're making up a musical phrase or sentence, chord notes, or the main triad notes, are the notes that you want to try and round your phrase off to. Now, I'm going to play a background C chord, and I'm going to play those notes, but I will also play the other notes in the scale, and you'll hear how some of them, although they fit, they always feel like they want to move on to the nearest chord note. Now, as you could hear from the example that I just played to you, some of the notes in the pentatonic scale seem to match and fit very nicely with the chord that was being played in the background, while some of the notes, although they matched, they had a very short time that they could last for before you felt like they wanted to move on to another note. Now, the name given to the notes that aren't in the chord but that are still in the scale are called passing notes. Very easy to understand. A passing note is in the scale. When it is sounded against the chord, though, it'll last for a few seconds, and then you'll go, "Ooh, if only it would move on." So hopefully you can see where we're leading to here. As a general rule, if you're making up a musical phrase for your solo, it is much nicer to round it off to a chord note and more musically satisfying. If you do a musical phrase and then on a passing note, it always feels not so much that you've made a mistake, but the musical sentence would have made more sense to end on a chord note. Now, let's take a look, and I will play to you some specific passing notes and relate them to the chord, and I will also play the triad or chord notes and relate those to the backing chord as well. Now, we're going to very quickly identify the passing notes and the chord notes in the scale as it is heard with the background C chord being played. Now, you can hear that wants to move up to the next note. And again, that's a C, so it's a chord note. That's another passing note. There's another chord note. Another chord note, a passing note, wanting to move up to the next chord note here. We'll continue along quickly. Passing, chord note, another chord note, passing note, and finally the last note of the scale, which is a chord note again. It's not really that important to memorize where the chord notes and the passing notes are. As time goes on, you will very easily hear which is a chord note because it'll sound right to you, and you can stay on that note for as long as you want. A passing note, on the other hand, will sound okay for a second, but its time span is very short. By that I mean you'll play the passing note and it'll go, I want it to move to the nearest chord note. So don't worry about where the chord notes and passing notes are, but do understand that it's essential to hear how they sound for when you're going to make up your musical phrases in your solo. Now I'm going to start out by showing you some very simple phrases that round off to the nearest chord note. But before I do that, let me point out that I'm going to be dealing with the 4th string. Here I'm at the 5th fret. I'm going to be dealing with the 3rd string, and again I'm on the 5th fret, and finally the 2nd string at the 5th fret. So these are the frets 5, 7, 5, 7, and then 5. Those were the fret numbers. Now let's start out with one idea to begin with. If you look, if I were to make a bar here and play at the 5th fret the strings 4, 3 and 2, those notes are G, C and E. And of course those are the main chord notes, or triad notes as they're often referred to, that make up your C major chord. So what we're going to do is start on the 4th string, and we're just simply going to find some very effective little phrases which will help you formulate some very nice, easy solo ideas. Here we go with the first one. We'll start with our first finger there. Now all I want you to do is play that note, hammer on to the 7th fret of the 4th string using that technique called a hammer on, and then lift off and pick the note. So we have, try not to pull off from the 7th to the 5th, don't do this, but simply hammer on and then follow by playing the note at the 5th fret, 4th string. So here we go again. Whoops. And then on the 3rd string we'll do exactly the same movement. We'll play the 5th fret, hammer on to the 7th, and then play the 3rd string at the 5th fret. Like that. And now this note here on the 2nd string 5th fret, in order to get to that, what we're going to do is, instead of playing it like that, which we can do by hammering on and going up to there, which is probably something you should try doing, but what we're going to focus on is bending to that note. So we're going to bend the 3rd string at the 7th fret so it climbs up in pitch and matches exactly the E on the 2nd string at the 5th fret. So we have this, we can hammer on like that, or we can hammer on and do a bend this way. Now I think it's very important at this stage to mention that in the first lead guitar course we covered how to bend a string the correct way, and if you didn't go over that, I urge you to at this point, because proper bend technique is essential for where we're going with these lessons. Now another thing too, with the pentatonic scale, it's particularly nice to end a note with vibrato. That is to give it a nice singing tone, and vibrato is rather difficult. And in the first lead course we went into great detail on how to do vibrato, the different types of vibrato, and also the various different ways of bending strings. So I don't want to spend too much time overlapping lessons between the two courses. So if you haven't done bending or vibrato at this point, I suggest you do that now before continuing on with this course.